Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 171 of the Masterclass podcast. My name is, of course, Cam Brennan. His name is, of course, Dave Hogue. And we are, of course, the same people that have hosted this show
since the
for
beginning.
almost 6 years. Yes, it is us. For better or worse, we are here yet again. How are you, Dave?
I'm all right. And I suppose if anybody is joining us, then they don't feel like we fall into the category of the worst. So,
Or they're just very kind.
yeah, that is possible. Very possible.
Well, cool. We are here. It is episode 171. We are in the book of Hebrews, which, of course, there are coffee and beer knockoffs of that name for obvious reasons. But we are focused on the book of Hebrews in the New Testament of the Bible, and we are going to continue on from where we left off last time, which is chapter 2, verse 10. And Dave, I don't know about you, but I say we just jump right into it and get to the good stuff.
For it was fitting that he, for whom and by whom all things exist, in bringing many sons to glory, should make the founder of their salvation perfect through suffering. For he who sacrifices and those who are sacrificed all have one source. That is why he is not ashamed to call them brothers, saying, I will tell of your name to my brothers. In the midst of the congregation I will sing your praise. And again I will put my trust in him. And again, behold, I and the children God has given me. Since therefore the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise partook of the same things, that through death he might destroy the one who has power of death, that is, the devil, and deliver all those who through fear of death were subject to lifelong slavery. For surely it is not angels that he helps, but he helps the offspring of Abraham. Therefore he had to be made like his brothers in every respect, so that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in the service of God, to make propitiation for the sins of the people. For because he himself has suffered when tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted.
So if we start at the beginning, verse 10, it says, For it was fitting that he, for whom and by whom all things exist, in bringing many sons to glory, should make the founder of their salvation perfect through suffering. So, interesting conclusion to draw. That it was fitting,
right,
that God would make the founder of our salvation, Jesus, perfect through suffering. It makes me want to go back to verses 8 and 9 just to read those real quick to kind of get some better context. Now in putting everything in subjection to him, he left nothing outside his control. At present, we do not yet see everything in subjection to him, but we see him, for who a little while was made lower than angels, namely Jesus, crowned with glory and honor because of the suffering of death, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. For it was fitting that he, for whom and by whom all things exist, and bringing many sons to glory, should make the founder of their salvation perfect through suffering. For he who sanctifies and those who are sanctified all have one source. That is why he is not ashamed to call them brothers. So it's almost as if, Jesus is in his death, becoming more like us in the fact that we die. Is kind of what I'm gathering from that. That is why he's not ashamed to call them brothers. We all have one source. We all, are come from God, right? God created us in his image. Jesus has always existed with God the Father and God the Holy Spirit. We all have one source, being God. Yet we are called brothers because of that, because Jesus died. I don't know. I'm really grasping at straws right now, Dave, and it's very uncomfortable.
So I'm going to kind of go on a little bit of a tangent in terms of it's occurring to me that Christians, my upbringing, the way we learn about the Bible and Jesus, I'm having this sense kind of not having spent enough time in the book of Hebrews. So, as we read this, I'm like, as a Christian, we, it's kind of funny. What I'm randomly thinking through my head right now is I was watching the Supreme Court Justice hearings last week. And there was a senator from Nebraska, and I don't remember his name. But one of the things that he said is he said, as Christians, we believe some pretty crazy things. We believe in a virgin birth. We believe in the Messiah, the crucifixion for our sins. And so we believe some very crazy things. And as we've been reading through these verses in Hebrews 2, I have this sense of like the author kind of wanting to construct an argument, or maybe not an argument, but give a train of thought that kind of goes, this is crazy, but maybe not as crazy as you might think it is. And so Jesus is, so I guess I have to come back to the first part of this is that, Jesus is the creator. He is God. He was there from the beginning and was creator with God. And God is now sending Jesus in order to restore our relationship with God. And I feel like I'm not doing the same thing. I'm not doing what was making sense in my head a moment ago. I just feel like there's a, I guess the best way for me to say this is I feel like there's a context in terms of the Jewish people who are looking for the Messiah and looking for the Christ. This train of thought, this logic should make some sense to them in terms of who Jesus is and what he came to do and his relationship with God the Father and being the eternal creator. And that while there are some crazy things to believe, it fits. All the pieces, connect, and it's not as random as maybe it may first appear to the outside. Boy, there's a lot of just gobbledygook there.
It's okay. We're going to go with it.
All right.
We can handle gobbledygook. So that is why he is not ashamed to call them brothers, saying, I will tell you, or I will tell of your name to my brothers. In the midst of the congregation, I will sing your praise. And again, I will put my trust in him. And again, behold, I and the children God has given me. So, okay, Jesus being friendly with us, great. Since, therefore, the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise partook of the same things, that through death he might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is the devil, and deliver all those who through fear of death were subject to lifelong slavery. So that's the gospel in 2 verses.
Mm-hmm.
So let's sit there for a minute or two. So since therefore the children, his brothers, us, humans, share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise partook of the same things, became flesh and blood, right? Was born, like we talked about, the virgin birth, right? Lived a life, grew up, went through puberty, all of that stuff. Sorry, that's the youth pastor in me coming out. I have to mention that to kids. And they're like, oh, no, he didn't. I'm like, yeah, he probably had acne.
Yeah, he did.
And he probably went through all of the weird things that you go through.
Yes.
That through death, he might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is the devil. So, you ever wonder why God took, like, the long play here? Like Jesus was born, lived for what we believe to be about 33 to 35 years, and then was crucified. And this happened after God had interacted with humanity for centuries, if not millennia, based on our, history, right?
Right.
Probably more likely, millennia. And he did all of that. And then Jesus was born as a human, lived a normal human life. Like, why the long play?
Yes. So the short answer is yes. I have wondered that. The concept that hit me recently was, reading the Old Testament, and I think I'm in 1 Samuel, but just the idea of, like, when they died, they died. They didn't go anywhere. And like that argument or that discussion occurs quite a bit in the Old Testament. And that is just such a crazy concept to me.
What, like
being a Christian that lives in the year 2020.
So you're saying like the finality of death is an odd concept for you?
Yeah, like they were truly, death was death, and there was not really a hope of resurrection.
Mm-hmm.
And there was not like this afterlife. Like what you had here was all you got. And then in conjunction with that, King David in particular still had this incredible desire to glorify God, even though at that particular time, his destiny was the same as anybody else. Like that was truly a, oh my gosh, like here's a man, described after, as a man after God's own heart. And yet there were not eternal, at least from what I can read and from his perspective, there were not quote unquote eternal consequences for his actions. In the same way that I think I view heaven, or it feels like we view heaven in terms of, we've talked about it before, fire insurance and not going to hell or going to the bad place. And,
Mm-hmm.
that is certainly a motivator for me.
Yeah, because it's interesting because, you can take the very, what's the word? Harsh view that we're just a bunch of accidents on a rock hurtling through space at incredible speed, waiting for something wrong to happen. You live, you pay taxes, you die, that sort of view.
Mm-hmm.
Or, the opposite view, which is, yes, we're going to die. Death is impermanent. Jesus, as it says here, through death, he might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is the devil, and deliver all of those through fear of death we're subject to lifelong slavery and free us. And then there's all sorts of slots on that spectrum, right? In between. And I don't know, I guess I'm caught up right now in the length of time God was willing to wait before enacting. And part of me, the snarky side of my brain is like, well, it's really easy to be patient when you live outside of time.
Yeah.
But I don't want to get struck down. So please, God. I said that was the snarky side of my brain, not the smart side, or the prudent side. But it is very interesting to me that we have the entire history of the Old Testament, the entire history of the world as we know it, right? Pre-Jesus, post-Jesus, and how much time really has passed, how small of a time you and I have been alive, let alone privy to what's actually going on around us. And, part of me wonders is if that scale of time, because that's something that we can appreciate to a certain degree. Like it's pretty much impossible to appreciate eternity, whether in time or space or, presence or whatever. But we can appreciate time to a certain degree. And I wonder if the scale of time that God has chosen to take to reveal the story and let it play out is to give us a scale with which to reflect upon his grandiosity. I don't know. I'm totally spitballing here because like if we can comprehend year, decade, couple of decades, 80 years, 90 years, what have you, and realize how much, like I just turned 34 last month, and like I already feel like I've experienced more than I thought you could in a lifetime. And barring anything, well, who knows, just I could die tomorrow, I could die in 60, 70 years, right, if I make it really, 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 really far. And to think that I'm already at the point where it's like I didn't know that there was this much to experience, and then consider all the things that I haven't experienced yet still,
Right.
and then how much I've forgotten of those 34 years, and start playing on that scale of stuff and then extrapolating that scale towards my parents' life and my grandparents' life and the great grandpa, that I knew for like, a cup of coffee. And then you expand to the 1900s and the 1800s and all the way back, gone to all of the old stuff. And I just wonder, again, I'll repeat myself, if that time scale is God's way of showing us a relatable way to understand his size and his power and his scope in a way that we can at least try and understand. But that's just conjecture on my part. I'm spitballing here because it's a podcast. I'm not preaching. So I'm allowed to be wrong here.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I don't know why he waited so long.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's one of the reasons why we should read the Bible from beginning to end at some point in our life and kind of try to see the arc of his story is that, there certainly is this, this awesomeness about him. There is, I don't know why he took so long to send Jesus. Still does not make, I don't understand that. And again, I think there is some truth to if you're an eternal God, then this is just hardly any time at all.
Yeah. But I mean, to that point and to my snarky point earlier, like God doesn't do stuff by accident. Like there's purpose to what he does, why he does it, how he does it, who he includes, this, that, and the other. So there's obviously a reason for it. Whether or not we'll ever know, well, that's a whole other thing. There's denominations are made because of that. So we're not going to solve that here in 5 minutes,
and that's his prerogative if we do know.
Cool. All right. So moving on, since we're not going to solve that, we'll just leave that alone for now. For surely it is not angels that he helps, but he helps the offspring of Abraham. Again, more differentiation between, well, at this point, he's differentiating us from angels. Before, it was always about differentiating Jesus from the angels, setting Jesus above the angels as, one unto himself, a unique individual in, the realm of existence. But here he's saying it is not the angels that he helps, i.e., it's not the people that were in lifelong slavery. The people that were in lifelong slavery and afraid of death were not angels, but us, the offspring of Abraham. Therefore, he had to be made like his brothers in every respect, so become human, so that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in the service of God to make propitiation for the sins of the people. And this is some foreshadowing to chapter 4 and chapter 3 and chapter 4, where it talks about him being a high priest who can sympathize with our weaknesses and with whom we can draw close in time of need for help because of his unique situation of being God and man in the form of Jesus on the earth. And so it's we'll get into this later in the book, but I think it's interesting. He says, therefore he had to be made like his brothers in every respect, so that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in the service of God. So in God's purposing and reasoning, the only way for his wrath to be satisfied was for a human to pay the price, because sin is a human problem. But that sacrifice had to be perfect, and there's no human that's ever or will ever be perfect. So he made one in Jesus who became like us so that he could understand what it's like to be human, to suffer as a human, to be tempted as a human. It even says later that he was tempted like us, yet without sin. So he went through everything that we went through and yet didn't sin, which is just astonishing.
It is, yes.
But I think what's really interesting in this, again, therefore he had to be made like his brothers in every respect. I think that is God showing his creation an incredible amount of respect, even though he had no real reason to do so other than out of the goodness of his own heart. Because it says elsewhere in Scripture that while we were still sinners, while we were still enemies with God, Christ died for us, the ungodly. Mm-hmm. And, why would God make Jesus like one of us, one of his enemies, one of the rebels, one of the people that embraced sin, which God can't see or look upon or be inside of? And it really shows me how deep his love for his creation is, how much he wanted his creation to be in relationship with him as he originally intended. Like the depth of desire he had to make things right, even though we were the ones that screwed it up, that he would willingly make Jesus live a human life among all of his enemies, among all of the sin, and that Jesus would be able to do so and do it without sin, so that he could be the propitiation for the sins of the people, that he could defeat death, that our lifelong slavery would be removed, that we would be freed. Man, it floors me, the lengths that God would go to.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. As we read this, I'm kind of taken back by the language that is used sometimes when it's, he must do this and he had to do this. And I don't always understand that, because I'm like, well, God can do whatever he wants. But there's certainly this idea of basic truths that exists, that sin has to be man, I'm just failing tonight. But it seems like to me in all of this that there's, and this was kind of, it's still on my mind and I can't say it, but there's an order to it. There's a purpose to it. And I think that not being Jewish and not growing up knowing the Torah and the Old Testament and looking for the Messiah and what he was to do, we don't get the full effect as somebody who may have been an early believer. I think about Andrew and James and those guys, and the fact that, they're kind of running up to each other going, hey, we think we found the Messiah. We think we found the Christ, like there's this anticipation, and there's this kind of just sense of like, oh my gosh, this is who we've been waiting for, and this fits. And so, yeah, but even in that, there was just this like, there's that love, that compassion, that just intangible, that while there is an order and there is the fulfillment of prophecy and all those kinds of things, there's just a love so deep and so intense that we can't even comprehend that, the creator of the universe would go through all of this. And then that's even just another like thought that I have of just like, how fortunate are we that we have like a good God, that, we could have a totally quote unquote wicked God who from the very beginning tortured us and did horrible things to us. But because he's God and because he's created us, it's kind of like, well, we have no room to complain about that, So yeah, fortunate, blessed, and just in awe of how intentional God is with everything. And I'm sure there is great purpose behind the fact that the story is played out over such a long period of time.
Yep. And then the last verse for today says, "For because he himself has suffered when tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted." And again, this is even more foreshadowing to what we're going to get to in chapter 4. But just think about that. What you just said, we could have had a wicked God, who tortured us and was bad and evil. But no, instead we have one who has suffered when he was tempted. And because of that, he's able to help those of us who are being tempted. Like he is a God that is able to sympathize and in certain ways empathize, because I don't want to steal the thunder of chapter 4, but Jesus starts out as someone who is sympathetic to our issues, and then without sin, because of what happens on the cross, is able to empathize with what it means to be apart from God. And we'll dive into that in a couple episodes, but I think, just the overwhelming idea I'm getting from this passage then is just the lengths that God is willing to go to communicate his love for us, his desire for us to be with him, his desire to put things right and to have them be as they were, to solve the problem that we created, all of that stuff, to take away death, to remove slavery, to sympathize and empathize with the temptation that we go through each and every day. His willingness to make Jesus human, to die, like all of it. It's just, it really is. I mean, if you don't believe it, it sounds crazy. And if you do believe it, it sounds crazy, but it's a good kind of crazy because there's good news all over it.
Yeah. Yeah. And even in that, I do just like, there is this element of, it's not forced upon us. It's not just so, there is that choice. There is that decision, that kind of that fleshing out of what is really in our hearts. And, there's something about the length and what he did that, it's not like gravity. It's so obvious and so true that gravity exists that, I just believe it. There's not that element to God per se. There's a degree of trust that has to be there, a degree of faith in following him. But at the same time, it's not so obscure that you can't choose him and allow him to love you and accept his salvation. And there's a very just intricate relationship that he has created that to me is also fascinating, that is just hard to comprehend in terms of being in the finite material world that we live in choosing to accept salvation, embracing salvation from eternal God that just loves us beyond what we can comprehend. So very, very intense.
Yeah, I'm like, I think my brain is done now.
Yeah, I think we both showed up tonight sort of done.
But luckily, the Bible is full of truth and full of engaging topics, and we've got a book in Hebrews that's going to both encourage and challenge and perhaps widen our understanding of why God did what he did with Jesus, what Jesus can mean to us, and then how that can affect our relationship with God, and then therefore our relationship with those people around us. One of the things that is becoming more and more aware, like I always knew I sucked at empathy and sympathy. It's just not something that I was ever very good at.
Mm-hmm.
Like I wasn't a robot, I have emotions. Dave can attest to that.
Yeah.
We didn't record last week because I was a mess and just had to get, a bunch of stuff off my chest and just kind of, process some things. And that would have, that's just not ideal podcast material, but like at all. But there's a difference between being emotional and having emotions, and then understanding those emotions in the light of what other people are dealing with, and like getting beyond your own emotions and your own situations and seeing other people's situations and hearing their emotions, and then being able to connect with them on a level that says, oh, wow, I haven't been there, but I can understand how that would suck. Or, man, I have been there. Let me go there again with you, so that you're not alone. And that, I think, is an area of growth that I'm starting to see growth in. Like I have a long, long, long way to go, but it doesn't terrify me as much as it used to. And part of that, I think, is because of we taught Hebrews chapter 4 over or like 5 verses in chapter 4 of Hebrews over 4 weeks at youth group in like April and May. And that really started like, man, if God can show me sympathy, and God can show me empathy in what he has done and what he chose to do to himself, then how can I just say, well, I'm bad at being empathetic? Like,
yeah,
I have no excuse and every reason, no excuse not to be empathetic, and every reason to learn how to be empathetic, because that's what God did for us and was for us. And if I'm, if we're called to be ambassadors of God to the world, and to share the gospel and spread the kingdom and be light in the darkness and salt and all of those things, then like I have to be able to connect with people on a base level that says I may not get it, but I can understand at a certain level what sucks and what's hard, or I can totally get that part. And not be afraid to go there. And so that's, I think, been one of the areas of growth in my personal life through all of this. And I'm excited to go through Hebrews with you and hear your thoughts on this sort of stuff. But just encouraged, really encouraged, and I'm excited to see what chapter 3 holds for us.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Cool. Well, we will get to that on the next episode.
Yes.
There's your cliffhanger, Dave. All right. That's it for episode 171 of the Masterclass. Thanks for riding along with us. And if you're new to the show, welcome. Thank you so much for checking us out. If you're not new to the show and you're just one of the crew, hey, we still think that it's awesome that you listen, and we really appreciate your time. If you want to get the show notes, you can look in your podcast app of choice, or you can go to supermegacorp.net/masterclass/171. We'll have links to the show notes there, links to Twitter, email, or phone. If you want to say hi, send in a question, send in some follow-up or a topic that you would like us to cover, or tell us where we screwed up, that's cool too. And then we will be back next time. Bye, Dave.
Bye.
Bye, everybody else.